Well, hi, everybody. It's David George Brooke, that gratitude guy, with my good friend, Dr. Robert Saul. And this is something we're starting with called Monthly Conversations with Dr. Bob and that gratitude guy. So, Dr. Bob, welcome to the conversation.
Oh, it's always great to talk, David.
Absolutely. So, how about you start us off with anything, some pearls of wisdom or anything we have from the good doctor? And actually, you know what? Let's do this. Why don't you tell people a little bit about your background? And then when you're done, I'll tell people a little bit about mine, just to give them a flavor of who they're dealing with the two of us.
Well, I'm a pediatrician and medical geneticist. I just retired 3 years ago, but that doesn't mean I've withdrawn from being involved. So I'm working with a local children's home as a consultant to help set up an enhanced trauma-informed care program. But what got me into, I think, our connection was work that I've been doing sort of since 1993, where I heard 12 words. I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource, where I realized that I need to be a part of anything that's happening in my community. I need to be part of the solution. And to do that, I need to devote my resources. So I ended up writing a series of articles and books on that over the last 30 years now. It's hard to believe. And that has kept me going. And right now, even in retirement, I post a weekly blog about what I think can make a difference in terms of parenting and community involvement and a variety of things. We got involved sort of in a because we have similar projects. And so it's my pleasure to get to know you and to share and to share with you what I have and to pick up your pearls of wisdom.
Well, thank you. And we do have very similar mindsets and similar goals, in that we're both we're only within a few months of each other as far as age. And you get to this age, you've got a lot of pearls of wisdom, you've got a lot of knowledge you've collected, and it's just so much fun to take that out to other people. My whole thing as that gratitude guy is to spread the word of gratitude, and how it's a mindset that can help you through so many things. It's a great coping mechanism. And it's all about having an attitude of gratitude, which means you focus on your blessings and abundance. And one of my favorite sayings is gratitude turns what you have into enough. And we have such a crazy world that we live in, that I just help people to have this mindset because it can get you through so many things. And I'm very fortunate enough to do a lot of speaking gigs, if you'll call them that, and coaching and workshops. And I sell books and gratitude journals and things like that. So but let's dive right into. I want, by the way, and let me just start with this because I just read it yesterday. Give the listeners a little recap of your blog. You mentioned that yesterday. I think it was called Conscious Parenting. Wasn't that the title? And
Conscious parenting. And you'll have to excuse my, as age has caught up with me, sometimes I don't remember what I just wrote.
oh, I know, no, I know that, especially when you post a lot. I do that
So,
with videos. Like, what video did I post? But I
so
dutifully read that when it comes out. And is it every Monday yours comes
every,
out?
every Monday at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
I invite any listeners that hear this to send me their email address, and I'm glad to include them on that list.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about conscious parenting, and my most recent book I published on conscious parenting. But I wanted to pull from that what I figure out were some of the basic tools. Parenting, is there's the basic nurturing that you make sure your child gets adequate nutrition and shelter and clothing and education, but it goes so far beyond that that I wanted to elucidate what I felt were sort of the three basic tools, and I build on that with later traits and how and what I hope the goal of parenting is. But those three basic tools were one, that parents need to accept instruction. The idea that you can do this alone and without help is total folly in my eyes. And the idea that it doesn't take a village to raise a child is total folly in my eyes. So I think we need to work together as to how we can accept instruction from your pediatrician, from your community, from educators, from healthcare people, and everybody out there is needing to. You need to listen to the advice. Now, you might not heed all the advice, uh, but I think you need to listen to it. Obviously, there's cultural issues and a variety of things. So instruction might be not be culturally competent for everybody, but I think it's so important that need to accept instruction. And again, the village, nobody can live in our society without the systems-based care that's out there, education, healthcare, law enforcement, you name it, everything that's out there. We can't do it on our own in today's society. And maybe you could do it 200 years ago out in the woods, but we can't do it now. We're so dependent on everything. Um, be actively engaged. Parenting is an active process, not a passive process. And what we're trying to do is develop safe, stable, nurturing relationships. You and I have talked about SSNRs, safe, stable, nurturing relationships. It's the antidote to trauma.
Yeah.
And it's what we can do to make a difference going forward. And the third thing was continued involvement. We have to always be involved. Sometimes it's easy to get involved, but staying involved is so important. So accepting instruction, being actively engaged, and being continuously involved were sort of the three basic tools I talked about in yesterday's blog post.
Yeah, it was great information. I really, I didn't even think about it when I read it about sort of segueing into that with our conversation today, but it just happens to be fresh on my mind from yesterday. But, I think it's interesting. I'm the father of two sons, 39 and 29. And I think back on parenting, how I was parented and how I parented them. And it's always struck me as so funny that all you have to have is the ability to have sex, a male and a female, and you produce a child called a baby that then you get to parent or whatever. And there's technically no license, no exam you have to take, no certification. There's all these things. And there's been a million books. I remember it was Dr. Spock, my mom read, and I'd see that book sitting on her desk or whatever, whatever it was called about infant and child care or something like that. But there's really no instruction manual. And so, and as I've asked you before, one of the reasons why I wanted to record our conversations, I just thought was interesting. I love the concept of a fly on the wall. And I can just imagine as a pediatrician, the extremes from really good parenting to not so good parenting, that this wide range that you saw. And I'm sure you had to control yourself from rolling your eyes sometimes.
Yeah, I learned my own humility as being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And as I used to tell medical students and young pediatricians in training, if you're not humbled daily, you're not paying attention.
Oh, interesting.
Probably compress that time frame to an hour.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not humbled hourly, you're not paying attention.
Right.
So as I was humbled as becoming a parent, I really learned to give a lot more grace to parents over the course of my career, probably than what I did at the beginning. And we can talk about it another time, or I've talked about 5 steps to community improvement, but the first step I talk about is learn to be the best parent you could be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I chose those words carefully because parenting is a constant learning experience.
Right.
And best parent is is a almost a euphemism because each of us has different abilities, each of us has different circumstances. So being the best parent we can be it varies from parent to parent. And for example, when I was a young doctor fresh out of training and parents asked me something, I knew the answer. I had read about it. I'd been taught about it. I was smart. I was not a parent yet. So I told them what to do. Over the course of 40 years, I learned that my job was not to tell them what to do, but to help gently peer behind the curtain, see the circumstances, understand the situation, and to help enable them, to help empower them to be the best parent they could be, to help them do what they need to do in the situation. So you're right. I saw some parents who I rolled my eyes. I hope I did that subconsciously, not overtly. Uh, but again, as I learned the various circumstances that parents are exposed to, and I was learning daily when I was in the clinic. I was able to give them more grace and practice mercy, and to help them so much more than I did at the beginning of my career.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You said you wanted to be humbled. It's important to be humbled on a daily basis or almost an hourly basis. And I don't know how much time you spent, 15 or 20 minutes with each parent and their child, or half hour, hour, whatever it was. But it always begs the question to me, and you talked about your father, could you be, I guess the answer is yes, but could you be a really effective pediatrician if you didn't have kids yourself?
Um, well, I think you could be, but I'd like to think you'd be more effective
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
as becoming a parent. I mean, certainly I know some pediatricians that don't have children themselves
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons, maybe fertility, maybe by choice.
Right.
Uh, so I don't want to damn them to an abysmal career
Mm.
because of that.
Yeah,
Uh, but I think parenting does teach you some additional skills that are very helpful along the way.
yeah. And something else that popped into my mind, that you and I have talked about before, but I think again it would be, now that we're videoing these, and kind of my session with Dr. Bob, and anything we want to talk about with gratitude with me or so forth. But something that is really interesting to me, I would like you to give a little bit of explanation to, is the adverse child experiences. I found that really interesting, because otherwise, AKA known as ACE, and maybe explain that to the viewers, listeners, because when you explained that to me, that really gave me a level of empathy that I had not had for a lot of people that misbehave or act out or whatever they do. So maybe elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, let me a little bit of background. The work of Dr. Bruce Perry, who recently wrote a book with Oprah, uh, sort of has turned the whole issue of trauma-informed care upside down. It used to be when you were dealing with children and adults and that had significantly bad, what you and I would determine to be bad behavior, the question was, what's wrong with you?
Mhm.
Well, more often than not, if you actually delve deeply into their life's experience, it's more like what happened to you. And as people look back at situations, for example, well, uh, I recently wrote a book called Thinking Developmentally, with I
Mhm.
co-authored with Andy Garner, and we're actually working on the second edition of that right now. So
Nice.
it's sort of come to the forefront now of what all this is about. You know, there was a study back in the early 1990s done in actually in California by Kaiser Permanente, looking at middle class adults and asking them to report adverse childhood experiences that they had, abuse, neglect, of witness to violence. There were three categories, 10 different things. And the more adverse childhood experiences they reported from 0 to 10, the more likely they were to have significant health issues in
Mhm.
adulthood and behavior issues that you and I might define as addiction or promiscuity, or a variety of things that just, and some of these were just hypertension, heart disease, a variety of things that you wouldn't necessarily think are ingrained from experiences in childhood.
Right.
So the more adverse childhood experiences you had, the more likely you were to have behavior problems and physical problems and mental health problems growing up. Now, that was sort of, and even that's somewhat simplified, because you would get a score of 1 for being exposed to violence, and you would get a score of 1 for being exposed to violence every day.
Wow.
I mean, so that, and we know being exposed to violence every day, coming home and seeing
Wow.
an abusive relationship is much more damning than seeing it once. But
Right.
that's how the ACE score was calculated.
Interesting.
Uh, so there was a lot of evidence put on, and it's rightly so, on trying to understand early childhood trauma and trying to be more understanding and dealing with how we handle those expressions in later life. And so that's the ACE part of it. Now we're figuring out that what we need to do, even if is how can we enhance what we call PCEs, positive childhood experiences.
Interesting.
And so as we look at doing enhanced trauma-informed care, we look at what the ACEs, we know that children have been exposed to that, but that doesn't define them.
Right.
We need to help set up trusting, safe, stable, nurturing relationships that enhance positive relationships so we can then build on that and help instill resiliency in the years ahead. And let me give you another quick analogy because I think this is really cool, and I don't think we've mentioned this. My co-author, Andy Gardner, who's a genius with this, and I'm just glad to be riding on his coattails. And other folks have looked about how do parents, how can they be an emotional container for their child? How can they help the child regulate affect? And it's sort of let's break it down into 3 stages. When they're babies and infants, we sort of do it for the child. We help regulate them. We're doing it for the child. As the child grows and they're trying to learn how to cope with life themselves, we do it with the child. And then as the child gets into teen years and early adulthood, we do it by the child.
Mm.
So if you think about helping our children, we're doing it for them initially, we're doing it with them, and then we're doing it by them. And when we're doing it for them, we're helping them get regulated
Mm.
to, and when we're doing it with them, we're helping restore them, if you will. And when we do it, excuse me, we're helping them when we're doing it later, when we're doing by them, we're helping them develop resiliency and what we call flourish in adulthood. So
Interesting.
we're doing it for them, by them, with them, uh, to help initially to restore them if they have trauma, to help promote resiliency, so when they get older they can be capable of flourishing.
Nice.
And that's a mouthful. So if you have any questions on that, please, I'd be glad to try to clarify it.
No, you explained that pretty well. For some reason, the question I have is more overarching, just listening to you talk about that and the passion and the understanding and being on the coattails of this other gentleman as the author and so forth. It's been 3 years since you retired.
Yes.
So what's the thing you miss the most?
Those daily relationships with the families.
Mm.
But I mean, I have to admit, let me give you a mea culpa here. Oftentimes when when I had to go to certain clinics during the days, or even when I had to work at night, there was a certain sense of dread. So, oh gosh, I got to go work and I got to go do this stuff. When I was done, I was exhilarated
Yeah.
because of the interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
And it was just, when I announced my retirement, when I finished my career, I was working in a multidisciplinary clinic for children with special healthcare needs, children that had G tubes, feeding tubes, children that had significant intellectual disability, children that had breathing tubes. And when I announced that I was retiring, the families started crying, and then I started crying because we had established such a relationship,
Sure.
and it was just so strong. And it was just, and I learned more from them than they think they learned a lot from me. I learned so much from them.
It's interesting. You said you were exhilarated after that. There was a sense of dread, and then you were exhilarated. I was on a call yesterday, and I used the example of this is a Tuesday, so yesterday was a Monday, and I had a pretty upsetting thing happen to me, and I thought, gosh, I probably should go do my normal walk, but I really didn't feel like it. I walked for 2 hours. It's about 7 or 8 miles, and I knew it would be better for me, but I was so tempted to just go watch TV and just tune out. I don't care because I was very upset. But I made myself get on my walk, got my shoes, got the proper shoes on, got my AirPods, listened to a podcast and so forth, and did the walk. And I couldn't believe how much better I felt when I came back. I mean, I knew that would probably be the case, but I just sat down and I looked at it was 16,000 steps or something like that. And I thought, how do we do a better job of remembering that exhilaration feeling and remember it before we do it when we have a sense of dread, to use your word? And because you always know you're going to feel better, but sometimes it's like the devil and the angel, and the devil wins out. I think I'm just going to go sit there and feel sorry for myself and watch TV or something, have a soda pop or something that's not good for you. So just remembering how, because almost every time you go through those things, you're so glad you did. And to your point, you were exhilarated after that, even though initially there was a sense of dread. I just think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be a runner. And so, and I was, if I didn't run every day, I really felt like my day was sort of empty.
Yeah,
Now hip disease and artificial hips now, and some other health issues took away running, but
yeah.
walking feels the same way for me now. And you're right. But even on the, like yesterday for us was a Seattle type day. It rained all day.
Oh boy.
And so I didn't get out. But I must admit, I did write. And that writing also gives me that sense of real pleasure when I'm done and reread it and I go, wow,
Right.
I think I really wrote something good there.
Yeah. One of the things I enjoy about reading I'm trying to think what the word was yesterday. There's always one or two words I go, I don't think I know the definition of that word. And he's putting those $10 words in here. I got to make sure I'm on top of it. But how do you learn a new word? Look it up and see what it is and use it in a sentence, that kind of thing. So it's funny. But no, but this, and oh, by the way, I wanted to throw something in. You said enhance. You used that word a little bit earlier. And just from the gratitude guy perspective, I encourage people, anybody that's listening or watching this, to do this, and the word enhance is in it. And I call it the association evaluator. And I think it's so important now when you're born and you have parents, you don't have a choice. I mean, those are your parents, and you don't get to decide who you associate with and who you don't. And then you grow up and you become a young person. And then maybe at 16 or 18 or 20, whatever the thing is, you start out on your own life and you can make your own associations. But I tell people it's so important to know who you're hanging out with. So this is my little exercise I tell people, I advise people to do once a year, maybe twice a year, but for sure once a year. And it's called the association evaluator. And what you do is you sit down, you can put it on a piece of paper or whatever. And the first thing you think about is 0, 1, or 2 people you should disassociate with. They're just not good for you. There's negative energy. I'm a very positive person. You're a very positive person. I like to be around people that, the rising tide floats all boats and that type of thing. And so it could be 0, but maybe 1 or 2 people that you just don't have that. It's just a negative vibe. And that's number one. Number two is 0, 1, or 2 people you should limit your association with. And those are the ones that maybe you work with that person. Maybe it's a family member. It's somebody you're going to see, a coworker. So you're going to be around them, but just try to limit your time with them. And then the third thing is where I made me think to mention this is your word, 0, 1, or 2 people you want to enhance your association with. And that's what's happening with you and me, is you mean, oh, I got to talk to him more often. This is just really entertaining. It's enjoyable. It's educational. It's all that type of thing. And then make those necessary changes. And the example I use, like a lot of people, I'm from Seattle, but like a lot of people, there's a Starbucks 4 or 5 blocks from here. And I always use the same example. The first person you should disassociate with, you go to the Starbucks, you have coffee with them for an hour, you walk back to your car, and the first thing you think is, that's an hour I'll never get back again. That hour is totally shot. I just wasted total 60 minutes of perfectly valuable time and all that negativity. So think about that. The second person, you go back to your car after an hour, and you can kind of take it or leave it. It was okay. Again, somebody you should limit your association with. And the third one, back to when you said enhance, made me thought to bring up this whole thing, is just this idea you have coffee with an hour, you go back to the car and it feels like you were there 10 minutes. And that's just the best feeling in all. Of all. I've noticed with conversations with you and me and certain people that you talk for an hour or whatever, and you look and you think it's been like 10 or 15 minutes and it's already been an hour. And so anyway, so just something to keep in mind, because one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. And I encourage people to really think about those associations and to pay attention to those, because it can impact you up or down. So anyway, so just a little tip.
Let me add something to that. The fellow I'm working with now, I'm consulting for this children's home, and the president is just one of these dynamos that I don't want the conversation to end, but when it has to end, when the secretary comes in and tells him he has to go to another meeting,
Hmm.
he always insists on walking me to my car.
Oh, interesting.
He learned that from somebody else who said it shows how you value the relationship.
Right. Wow.
And so so that individual walking you from Starbucks to your car would be that additional
Yeah.
bit that's the three plus relationship that you want to keep. And so we just, it's again, we almost have to break off the conversation at the car, but
Right.
then we end up saluting each other, and me driving off. It's just beautiful.
But it's interesting too, because you get another 5 minutes,
Yeah.
so that as you walk to the car, and then depending on how close the car is, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it might be. But yeah, it's really interesting. I remember saying that in Europe, they have those things in the airports where that show the flights, and it's all electronic now, but they would go and they would change and go up like this. And I always think that's how I feel with the questions, whether it's Dr. Bob or different people that I know, where I always have a queue of about 10 or 15 questions in the back of my mind. And then there's other people that you don't have any. You just go, you think, what am I going to say when they end this sentence? Because you can't think of anything else to do. But with that in mind, now we come to the science portion, because I don't want to go back to med school and I don't want to go back to school. So I have a question for Dr. Bob. Uh, and in high school, I took biology, but I know there was chemistry and physics, which, generally two very tough subjects, which I don't think I took, which I kind of regret. So I just have a question about, this is chemistry. And so I was thinking about this in anticipation of my conversation with Dr. Bob. So would you explain the basics of, we have oxygen, which I believe is O2, is the actual molecules or whatever. So we breathe that in because we need that to live. And then we expel CO2. So that means that a molecule of carbon has been added to the O2, correct? And that's carbon dioxide.
Correct.
And then, so then what I want to know, so then I was thinking, so then why does carbon monoxide kill somebody? And when they go put their hose in their car and do all that, and then they die of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Well, let me a little bit of respiratory physiology.
Perfect.
Physiology, that's
That's what I
another
was
one for
looking
you.
for.
Well, obviously, the whole biochemistry process, and that uses energy in our body, and ends up is oxygen dependent. And so oxygen has to get carried to those energy centers in our cells, and that's in red blood cells. And the protein that does that is what's called hemoglobin. So
Mhm.
oxygen attaches to the hemoglobin, gets carried to the cells, gets into the little energy furnaces in the cells, and it gets consumed. So that's continually, oxygen is continually needed with that. In the process of then the waste, if you will, carbon dioxide is made and gets carried to the lungs. And in the lungs, we have this, there's the big tube that goes down, there's the trachea, the small tube or the bronchi, the smaller tubes are the bronchioles, and then there's air sacs. And it's in those air sacs where the air is exchanged. So oxygen goes in, carbon dioxide comes out. Um, I don't know the specific mechanism, but I suspect what carbon monoxide does is it blocks up that exchange.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the carbon monoxide probably blocks the exchange of O2 in
Mm-hmm.
or CO2 out, or both,
Interesting. Interesting.
because that's a very fine mechanism where these little capillaries go through these air sacs for the molecules of gas to be exchanged.
So then water is H2O. So is that two molecules of hydrogen and one molecule of oxygen?
Correct.
So the gills in a fish can somehow extract that one molecule of oxygen as part of H2O to breathe when they're underwater.
Yeah, I don't know that process, but yes,
That's
they have that.
effectively
Yeah, that's their respiration is different than ours.
right, right. But I also thought it was interesting because people drowned in water, and yet one of the molecules is in fact oxygen in water, which is, and as you say, the exchange too. So, okay, so now I'm changing subjects again because this just came up yesterday, and I would love for the viewers and listeners to hear this because I've heard this now from 3 or 4 different people. So I said, and if you know about this, all the better. If you don't, it's okay. But for the 4th person in a row in about 4 or 5 weeks, I've heard the power of taking an ice bath or a cold shower. And how much do you know about that in terms of, it sounds like it's just, it always, I live in cold, rainy Seattle, and all things, I don't want to take a cold shower. I don't want to take an ice bath, but everybody seems to rave about the benefits of that. Do you know much about that?
Well, I can't address the benefits per se.
Mm.
I know a lot of athletes do it after their rigorous exercise, and you see these football players that after rigorous practice
Right.
or even after a game hop into an ice bath. To be honest, I'm not sure why. I would think that it's to, I mean, it diminishes the blood flow to the tissues.
Mm-hmm.
So I presume what you're trying to do is diminish the blood flow to the tissues and decrease the potential for inflammation
Right.
from all that exercise.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
hopped into a warm bath, it would enhance it and uh probably maybe lead to more inflammation. But if you and I have get that backache and you want to get the heating pad and you
Mm-hmm.
put the heating pad on because you want to enhance the blood flow to that area and
Right.
bring the healing powers of blood and anti-inflammatory cells to that area.
Yeah.
But cold shower to me is only when the hot water doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ice bath, no way. And polar plunges, no way.
The I have I'm in a men's group, and we're meeting tonight, a bunch of guys in yours and my age range, and one of the friends kind of orchestrated it, and he said a bunch of 60, 70-year-old guys get together and share a meal and just talk about stuff and so forth, which was kind of cool. And I do that a lot, like you and I are on Zoom and so forth, but it's fun. This is in person in Seattle. But anyway, one of the guys was just raving about the benefits of an ice bath, and he has one of those tubs or something like that. And when I looked at the thing on it, there was a thing yesterday with a group I was in that showed it helps with depression, helps with anxiety, helps with inflammation. It was going just down the list, and I'm assuming if it's in an ice bath, it's probably 3 or 4 minutes or something like this. Who knows what? But anyway, but I'm going to do it tonight to see, because, and even though a couple of the other members went, no way, when we were doing the email thread, and I thought, no, I'm going to give it a try. I've heard enough about it that I just kind of want to see. And but it had a lot of benefits and stuff. So I will report back on that. And uh, so we'll see
Well,
how.
I'm I'm skeptical about a lot of those things because some of that stuff is what we call placebo effect.
Oh, sure.
That is, if you did warm baths and for a certain group, and if you did ice baths for a certain group, and then measured certain things,
Right.
would there really be less anxiety in both of them or less depression in both of them? So you're only doing one arm of this study. You're only doing
Yeah.
the ice bath arm.
I've always thought the placebo effect was really fascinating, and the sugar pill and all that kind of thing. And then, oh, I think I feel so much better. And all they've gotten is some sugar and so forth.
I mean,
So
there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, if you take a cornstarch pill or
right.
or a sugar pill and you feel better, great.
Yeah, the end result is what you're getting, which is cool.
But just don't say that's what everyone should do
Right,
if
right.
they shouldn't be taking that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, well, we have about 5 more minutes, and even though this is kind of the Dr. Bob, uh, medical report, if you will, or conversation, which you and I always have, which is why I thought it'd be so much fun to video it and then put it out the world. Any questions that you think around gratitude for the gratitude guy that I can enlighten the audience with at all that come to mind?
Well, you know that I am struck by as I read some of your posts, how gratitude fits in so well with my fifth step for community improvement, forgiveness.
Oh, sure.
How you need to forgive yourself first,
Yeah.
forgive others, and do it now.
Yeah.
Because it's when you finally are able to exercise forgiveness, you realize the gratitude that you have for what's around you, and the ability to forgive yourself, extend mercy to yourself, the ability to forgive others,
Yes.
and realize the gratitude in that step.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So they're not synonymous, but they're what I would call contiguous. They're together.
Well, you really hit the nail on the head. It starts with, I contend in one of my modules, the most important relationship you ever have is the one you have with yourself. And people will say, well, I have faith in whether it's your creator, that's fine. That can be one. This can be 1A, 1B, one or two or whatever. But it's so important. And I find this, I was on the same call last night when they were talking about the ice baths. And this one gentleman, he was very transparent and he said, I just don't think very highly of myself. And I haven't done, a couple of people chimed in and said, oh, whatever his name was, you're fantastic. You're this. And I thought, boy, we all seem to at some point in our lives, if not consistently, struggle with self-esteem, self-confidence, and the self-image of how we see ourselves. And I beat the heck out of myself a lot of times. I try not to anymore. But what has worked so well for me, and I suggested it to this gentleman last night, is with the gratitude journal, and I sell them, and I sent him a link yesterday, so I think he bought one. And I said, but give it a week, give it and try it. And when you're writing every single day what you're grateful for, it makes you really have a better view of yourself. And that's where the forgiveness, it starts with the greatest, what was that song, the greatest relationship you ever have is with yourself, and knowing and loving yourself, I think was the lyric. And it's so true. And then that sort of fans out from there. And then you are able better to feel good about yourself. When you have a great level of self-esteem, self-confidence, self-awareness, everything in your life works better. It just does. I mean, it's just when you're a 9 or a 10, your world is just humming along. When you're a 1 or a 2, you're not doing really well. Things don't work very well. So I encourage people, and I'm thinking back about you back in med school. And I have these yellow pads that, so many people use, and I write on them all the time. And even though I got a laptop and a tablet and a phone and all that, and you were taking notes in med school and going through all that kind of thing. And in the gratitude journal, there's a little saying in the beginning that says, if you think about it, it's like a dream. If you talk about it, it inspires you, but if you write about it, it empowers you. And there's so much power, and I am grateful to Dr. Bob for taking the time to enlighten us about chemistry and so many other things today and so forth. And it plants it in your brain, and it just makes it so much more effective. And so I just encourage people to not only get a gratitude journal, but just focus on their blessings and abundance. And this roller coaster ride of life that we're on is so much easier, because when you're at the top of the roller coaster, everybody's loving you and everybody's returning your call. It's fantastic. But what I really try to preach, if you will, is what's going to help you when you're on the bottom and nobody's getting back to you and you feel like you're the loneliest person in the world. And really reinforcing that relationship with yourself is one of the best ways of all. So very, very helpful. But it does have a great relationship with forgiveness, to your point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure gratitude, like forgiveness, it's an evolution. I
Yeah,
mean, when your 4-year-old whacks your 2-year-old and you tell him you're sorry, I'm sorry. And
yeah,
that's different than the forgiveness you should be exhibiting at 14, 24, 44, 64. You should
exactly.
be learning, you should be able to do better as time goes along.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had a friend, had a little falling out. Now it's probably been 15 years ago, but had been good friends. And he said some things and it just worked. We kind of went our separate ways, but I felt he'd really kind of crossed the line. And then a couple of years later, he calls me. And before he says anything, he says, I would just like to ask for your forgiveness. And the fact that he said that was so
Yeah.
much more powerful. I'm sorry, like to your point, like, just want to let you know I'm sorry. I'm sorry is such a throwaway line. But when
Yeah.
he said, I would like to ask your forgiveness, and I said, okay. And then he went on to explain, and so forth. And then we repaired it and we've been fast friends ever since. But
Yeah.
that's a great example of the power of words, forgiveness versus I'm sorry, and just how we characterize things with each other. So it's funny.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So, all right, my friend. Well, listen, that is our time. I appreciate everybody tuning in and listening and watching. And Dr. Bob and I will be doing this once a month. And I appreciate all of you viewers and those of you that hung on till the end. But we will see you next month. Thank you so much.